cricket club, surprisingly, of late has had not a great deal to do with either the football club, other than letting them use the premises, and they have on occasions used the common for pre-season practices. In the past we shared lots of players, not so much now. I think my sons were probably the last two to play both sports regularly for the village sides. As regard to bowls, I think most of our contact was conflict. Going back to the 50s and 60s, people used to walk around the village a lot more than they do now, and there was a quite well-defined footpath that ran from the corner by the flower patch across to what was then Colin Porter's dad's cottage, but is now Bowler's. And Charlie Palmer's father, who was a keen bowler, every Saturday without fail used to take that route to go to the bowls club. It didn't matter what was happening in the cricket. We had to stop while Charlie's dad made his way with his bowls, oblivious to all of us across the corner. As the ball started to get hit further, there was conflict when the balls were hit into the bowls club. Andrew's dad, Michael, was very upset when his new Range Rover was dented on one occasion. On another occasion, I can recall going to retrieve a cricket ball from the bowls club that had been deposited there by one of our batsmen, and one of the lady bowlers said, "Can you ask him not to hit it quite so far in future?" However, as regard to history, the first recorded game on Stock Common took place in 1769. It was between 11 gentlemen from Stock and 11 gentlemen from Kent. Doubts have been cast on that, because 11 gentlemen from Stock is reasonable, but from Kent, well. And of course, in those days, the common was huge. It stretched as far as Downham Road, linking up through various woodland down as far as Ramsden Heath. It extended nearly as far as Petton along the Chelmsford Road. But I suspect that the game would have been played roughly where the ground is now, because that was the nearest point to Stock Village. The club itself was probably founded sometime before 1850. We were one of the founder members of the Club Cricket Conference in 1850, along with various other local clubs such as Writtle. And in 1854, we erected the first shed for the use of cricketers on Stock Common, which is that building there. The building cost £24, but we've still got the receipt for its erection by a Mr. Plume in the sum of 12 shillings. That really lasted unchanged until 1959, apart from the connection of mains water in 1948 at a cost of £8. The common, of course, isn't really a common, it's now a village green. It's owned by Lord Peter and rented by the club from him for a peppercorn rent of 5 shillings a year, which Lord Peter regularly grants us a 28-year tenure to avoid having to collect the 5 shillings every year, which obviously isn't very cost effective in this day and age. We have a number of scorebooks from the early years. There's one over there from 1885, but some of the older ones we deposited for safekeeping in the Essex Record Office. It's interesting that some of the fixtures were actually against London clubs. A lot of them were local, obviously Writtle, Ingatestone and so on. But thinking about it, in the 1870s, to get from Forest Gate, as one side did, to play cricket at Stock, either they were on tour or they were very adventurous, because, you know, train to Billericay, and then how do you get from Billericay? Do you walk? Do you ride a horse? What do you do? How we got to arrange away games in those days, I don't know either. Presumably you walked or you took a horse and cart. There was always an annual club match between the residents of Stock and the residents of Buxbury. That was a regular pre-season fixture. The batting in those days was dominated for many, many years by Mr. A.C. Cotty, Phil's grandfather, Phil? Yeah, Phil's grandfather. If he didn't play, Stock lost. It was basically as simple as that. And a Plume was obviously a very good bowler. He took 10 wickets on 1 or 2 occasions. However, generally, the ball dominated the bat. There was very few high scores. Games were set out to be of 2 innings, and were often completed. 2 innings on a Saturday afternoon was not uncommon. One of the conventions that seemed strange in this day and age was that you played on 2 stumps, so a side may have been horrendously beaten, but if they couldn't get the team that was batting out, they carried on batting until the end, and then you went presumably down the pub. I'm also assured that there were odd occasions when the side batting first didn't get all out, so they batted all afternoon and the other side didn't get a knock. That was their hard luck, but if they weren't good enough to bowl you out, you carried on batting. I'm not sure what the bowlers thought about that on the batting side, but there you go. The grass in the outfield was cut by scythe, so I guess it wasn't necessarily all that closely cut, although I can remember seeing old boys around the village when I was a lad cutting with the scythe and getting the grass nearly as close as you could get it with a lawnmower. But I was assured by Frank Elliott that it was not uncommon for skylarks to nest in the outfield, and that you didn't get many fours, boy. And the scorebooks do actually show that. You see the odd 5 where Frank assures me that was, or assured me that was because you couldn't find the ball in the outfield very easily on occasions. There were more 6s than 4s. It could be quite an occasion, I think, cricket back in the 19th century. In 1873, for instance, Stock had a all-day game against Ingatestone on the bank holiday. The Essex Regiment Band was booked to play during the intervals, but failed to turn up, and Ingatestone put a large section in the local paper apologising for the failure of the regiment to turn up, which was of course due to the colonel of the Essex Regiment and nothing to do with the Ingatestone Cricket Club. The overs in those very early days were only 5-ball overs. Whether that was because it was easy to keep count on your fingers, I don't know, but the rules actually said that in the first class game, overs were 4-ball, and village or club level 5-ball overs. The 6 balls came in the sometime in the 1880s. The games continued, obviously, on much the same basis, friendlies, right into the 20th century. And the first major problem for Stock Cricket Club, as for the rest of the country, of course, was the First World War. It came as something as a shock to me, like everybody here. I've looked at the War Memorial, but I've never actually taken the trouble to count up the numbers of it. And 40 young men from Stock died in the First World War. That must have had a tremendous impact on everybody and on the cricket club, of course. We don't have many scorebooks from the early 1900s, but one we do have with 3 names on that War Memorial were playing in 1900. So one can only assume that there were several more on there that perished in the conflict. The other major upset from the cricket club's point of view was that the ground, the common, was commandeered to be an army camp during the war. No cricket was played during the war, and not only was it an army camp, it was a Royal Horse Artillery army camp. And of course it rained during the war, and when they left, the whole ground was a quagmire. There seemed to be very little chance of playing cricket on there again ever. Fortunately, of course, ground does recover, but a deputation rather bravely trekked to London, a deputation of cricketers, and they secured from the War Office compensation in the princely sum of 10 guineas, which of course doesn't sound a lot of money, but in the 1920s the club's annual expenditure was about £24, so 10 guineas was a lot of money in those days. Games continued after the war for many years, really until right up to the 1980s. The ball dominated the bat. 5 wickets are far more common than 50 runs by a batsman. To give you some idea of the kind of scores that appear in the scorebooks, on the 14th of June 1924, Stock played Rettendon. Stock ruled out for 39, with H. Elliott, the only one in double figures, with 15. Rettendon were then all out for 12. A.C. Cotty took 6 wickets, Hubert Evans 4 wickets. In the second innings, Stock amassed all of 37, with Hubert Evans scoring 10. But in their second innings, Rettendon were demolished for 6. With the wicket taking reversing, with A.C. Cotty taking 4 and Hubert Evans taking 6. You didn't let sides off the hook, you didn't bowl somebody that couldn't bowl, you murdered them if you could. Fixtures continued to be on that friendly basis, although the rivalry between traditional village rivals such as games against Ingate, Stone, Writtle, more latterly Gallywood, who are Johnny-come-latelys, they only started in the 1930s. Billericay, they certainly weren't friendly. I mean, I played when those friendlies were still in existence and they were not friendly. After the game they were pretty friendly, but not during the game. Clubs from East London continued to visit Stock, no doubt attracted by the classic village green scenery. Stock had 1 or 2 regular fixtures. Like the footballers, it was difficult getting into away games. The charabang, the ubiquitous charabang in the village, was certainly used to get to away games if they were any distance. Other games players would cycle to with the gear hanging from handlebars, etc. Very few people owned a car. And the sight of this cricket team straggling along the road to Gallywood, for instance, in the 30s must have been quite something. Probably even more something coming home. The famous fixture, I was told again by dear old Frank Elliott, for away games was against Laindon. Not because Laindon was a wonderful ground or they were a great bunch of blokes, but quite by accident. Frank assured me it was by accident. They always stopped at the Fortune of War on the way home. And this particular Saturday, the Fortune of War was packed with loads of young girls from the East End of London who had been on the shirt factory outing to Southend. A whale of a time was had by all, and apparently thereafter they carefully worked out when the shirt factory's day trip to Southend was, and the fixture with Laindon continued right up to the war. The postscript to that was Frank Elliott. This was well into the late 80s. Don't you dare tell my wife. By the 80s, the bowlers were beginning not to get it quite so much their own way. Wickets had improved. We got, like the Bowls Club, a motor mower had come in, heavy rollers were coming in, and the other big factor was that because we'd joined structured league cricket, bowlers were restricted to 9 to 12 overs, which at the time I found devastating. I, with Colin Porter or Fred Dixon or Bill Reader, was used to bowling 20 odd overs in an afternoon. If you were a good enough bowler, you stayed on, and that obviously, if you had two very good bowlers, that restricted the number of runs that were going to be scored. League cricket, of course, changed that. You were restricted to 12 overs in league cricket. In the village competition it was 9, and obviously in those short periods you've got less chance of taking 5 wickets. The wicket for many years was, I honestly don't know how it was cut or who cut it before the war, but after the war we paid an honorarium to a groundsman. In 1946 it was somebody called E. Hours. He received £10 per year for the time-consuming task of preparing wickets. He was succeeded by Albert Dixon in 1947 or 1948, it's not quite clear from the records which year. But he certainly continued in that capacity well into the 60s. I think his final honorarium was something like £25, wasn't it, Nick? Yeah, it rose in very small increments. I've got how he did it, he used to haul that old hand mower by himself up and down the wicket. But the biggest memory as a lad, it was if you dared get anywhere near that square, you'd be told in no uncertain terms to keep off or you'd get a clip round the ear. And you knew Albert meant it, so you didn't go on the wicket. So the wicket was improving. Equipment didn't change much. You still had a club bag, which was full of everything. I can still remember the committee meeting when Maurice Elliott suggested it was rather unhygienic to have club boxes, which he was right, but they had been a feature of the bag until then. The other thing that I think has changed enormously is the number of cricket balls used in a season. In 1948, the club purchased 4 cricket balls. Every club in the area had an expert on refurbishing, repolishing cricket balls. They must have been made much better than they are now, because in my recollection they didn't go out of shape. You just repolished them and used them again. If you got a new cricket ball, it was a bit of a shock actually. You certainly didn't get a new cricket ball in the second team. Today, of course, you get a new ball for each innings. And they still go out of shape after about 4 overs. The games continued to be played on a friendly basis until the advent of the National Village Competition in 1972, which was when, I think I'm right in saying, Stock first entered. It was 40 overs, 9 over maximum per bowler, and we thought it was great because the winners could get to Lords. We didn't do very well in 1972, but in 1973 we got to the last 8 nationally. We had a wonderful day on the Common. Loads of people came to watch us lose disastrously to Marden, and we raised a lot of money that day. By that time, this old pavilion, the 1854 pavilion, had got rather outmoded, and in 1959, in fact, it was extended. Changing rooms were put at each end, each with a cold shower, which was never used. I think I used one twice on days when it got up in the 90s, but it was cold. There was no hot water, it was just a cold shower. They were mainly used for storing deck chairs. There was a score box at one end, and there was actually a toilet attached as well. This was a cartoon that appeared in the South End Standard in 1935. You've got C. Connie on there, F. Makings, Hubert Evans, the Honorary Secretary, Tommy Allen. Apparently it was a wet day, as you can see, but Stock did win the match. Yeah, this was putting on the extension to that old pavilion. As you can see, there was a bit tacked on this end and a bit tacked on the other end to provide changing facilities and a bit of storage and a toilet. And it was all the work was done by club members. It cost about £500, just over £500 for the materials. The fundraising involved the ubiquitous whist drives, which seemed to be a major source of fundraising back in the 50s. And there was the odd dance, and they didn't raise huge sums of money, but donations were very important, of course. The village has always been very generous with regard to donations. Another major purchase back then was an old road roller. That also helped to improve the wicket, of course, and that road roller is still going strong, although we did replace its diesel engine with a petrol one a few years ago, which is a lot easier to start. The new pavilion was opened by the Essex and England cricketer Peter Smith on the 2nd of May 1959. And that was recorded by the late Joan Harvey. She painted that. That's a reproduction of the painting that she painted for Maurice Elliott from the press photograph. As you can see, no paddocks there in those days. The common, in fact, even by 1959, the common was literally on the edge of the village. There was no Valentine's, there was no Mill Meadow, there was no Faulkner Close. It was on the edge. And in fact, to such an extent that I can remember Freddie Dixon telling me when he was a lad before the war, it was too far to walk to the common to have your evening game of cricket with a tennis ball and a cricket bat. So they always played in that, what doesn't appear to be a large area till you stop and look at it, outside the Cock Public House across the main road there. That was their cricket pitch. Because there wasn't a lot of traffic, I guess. Obviously that's changed somewhat. That extended pavilion was further extended in 1968 when a ladies' toilet was added and a kitchen and a bar was installed. Les Oakley, who used to serve not always very graciously behind the bar, but he used to help us out serving. The invention of the kitchen did change things somewhat, because up to then teas had been a difficulty. For many years they were purchased from warders of Ingatestone, so that was a fairly expensive arrangement. And then that changed when Doug Harris took over the Baker's Arms. His wife used to provide the teas, and we used to walk round to the Baker's Arms for tea. I always found it rather strange, because we walked to the Baker's Arms for tea, and then after the game we always drank in the hoop. It never seemed quite fair, but that was the way it was. I will remember the opening of the cricket club bar, because I was actually at the time, well, I played for Stock since made my debut for Stock in 1959. I then got fed up because I didn't get much of a bowl, because as I said, good bowlers bowled all afternoon, so Colin Porter and Freddie Dixon bowled all afternoon. I didn't get much of a look in. And I got talked into playing for Old Chelmsfordians. So that particular bank holiday I was playing for the Old Chelmsfordians against Stock. And I don't know if any of you remember David Lang, but Hermione's. David was a character. He was the umpire at Stock, and David was always in charge. For instance, I can remember on one occasion playing at Hatfield Peveril when Colin had a lad called David Doe caught behind the wicket. And in those days, people were generally sporting. David put his bat under his arm and started walking on. David bellowed at David Doe, "Where do you think you're going?" So David said, "Well, I hit it, I caught it, I'm out." David said, "I didn't give you out, get back there." So poor David, who was quite a timid guy, he walked back, stood there, looked at Colin, stepped out of the way, let it bowl him and walked on. Anyway, on this particular day, David was umpiring, and my old mate, who also at the time was playing for Old Chelmsfordians, who later came for a couple of seasons to play at Stoke, Nobby Clark, was umpiring the other end. Both of them liked to drink. Every time the sun went in, bad light, off we go. Everyone came off, had a pint. After about the fourth occasion, Freddie Dixon, who was skipper of Stock, was absolutely steely and ordered David not to dare to do it again unless it was actually raining. However, it was a good day, I remember it well. Obviously that stopped going around the hoop, the bar carried on serving till quite late. The next big change in Stock was in 1970, when Lord Peter agreed that we could play cricket on the common on a Sunday. That wasn't greeted with universal joy. The Reverend Tatum let it be known that if we attempted to play cricket on Stock Common on a Sunday, he would pitch his deck chair on the wicket. Colin Porter let it be known that he'd damn soon move him. Fortunately, the confrontation never took place. As I've said, we entered the village competition in 72 and 73, reached the last 8. My brother-in-law Mervyn Day at the time was just starting out in his West Ham career, and he mentioned that he was going to play the following year for us. And the West Ham players were quite impressed that we'd reached the last 8, so they readily agreed, with the blessing of Ron Greenwood, to come down and play us. And that was the team. There's some famous names there. There's Trevor Brooking, Bobby Moore, Frank Lampard Senior, Tommy Taylor. It was about 8 or 9 of the first team came down. We didn't dare advertise it because obviously the common's not particularly secure, but there was still a fair number of people turned up, and it was a very social occasion. I sat in the pavilion afterwards with Bobby Moore and his first wife. I think we were like fish in a glass bowl. It was all these lads were looking in, and we were sitting there with a beer, chatting. But it was a good fixture, and everybody enjoyed it. Stock, of course, won. Bearing in mind that the previous shed had served the village for over 100 years before it was reckoned worthy of change, by 1978 the old pavilion was considered a bit old hat, and it was impossible to extend it, so we decided that we should build a new one. Part of that was the funds generated in 73 from the various bar takings, and the new pavilion was erected and finished in 1979, and again much of the work was done by players and village-based craftsmen, bricklayers and so on helped, offering services at negligible rates, to be honest, and the new pavilion was completed at a cost of £9,019, 18 pence. Up to this time, and still then, really, the team was mainly drawn from villages. The 73 side contained 8 players who either lived in Stock or had been born there, and the remaining 3 lived on the Stock side of Billericay. But by 1991, and the change was quite rapid after about 1980, but by 1991, only 3 of the national village competition side had direct village connections, and only 1 actually lived in the village. We had continued to prosper in the National Village competition. We were the Essex Village champions 5 times between 1975 and 92, and we were the Essex area winners 8 times between 73 and 92. The big achievement, or the biggest achievement to date, was reaching the national semi-finals in 1991, when we lost to a very strong side from Wales called St Fagans, based in Cardiff. How they qualified as a village was always a mystery to us. They contained several Glamorgan second 11 players and were much too strong for us, but we put up a reasonable show. Saturday cricket actually continued to be friendlies after 72, and we were quite late in joining the Mid-Essex League. We didn't succumb to the league cricket until 1981. For some years we struggled to fulfil our potential. We were relegated in 1984, which I think did us good. It woke everybody up. And we bounced back the following season as champions of Division 1. And just 4 years later we were champions of the Premier Division. This was a feat that was repeated on several occasions afterwards. Turn of the century, however, was a pretty rough time for Stock. We lost a lot of players. New players weren't coming along. First 11 was relegated again. The second 11 actually went into free fall. And the third 11, which had been started in 1984, had to be scrapped because we didn't have enough players. There was a variety of reasons for that. Kids didn't play cricket in school anymore. The price of property in Stock was making it very unusual for people young enough to play cricket to move into the village. Youngsters that were born in the village that might have been playing cricket had to move out if they wanted to buy a house. And although we started some coaching in the late 80s, and we did in fact start a predominantly teenage Sunday second 11 to give those youngsters a game, there was no structured Colts teams in place, and it did. You wondered where the next player was coming from. You had to go out really and hunt for players. But thanks lately, in the last 6-7 years, to the drive of Phil Cotty and aided with the support of Pauline and various other helpers, Colts Cricket is really regenerating the cricket club. I don't think it's ever been in such a powerful position to do well. Although the first 11 was relegated last year, having returned to the Premier as Division 1 champions in 2006, the Premier Division now is not as it was. The clubs, there are some clubs that actually pay players to play for them. Some villages have very wealthy sponsors who import grade cricketers from Australia, the West Indies and South Africa and even India. So the Premier is a very difficult place to be successful nowadays. Nevertheless, I'm sure we hope to get back there, particularly with the continuing strength of the Colts. And indeed, one of the under-15s has actually been Sam Hyde, I think it is, isn't it, Phil, who's been selected for the Essex under-15s this year, which is some achievement. He's probably the only white boy in a sea of Asian faces from East London. So we were able to refound the third 11 3 years ago, and they promptly proved their worth by achieving promotion in their first 3 seasons. The second 11 has climbed right back up the divisions, and the Colts teams continue to prosper. I think it's wonderful on a Sunday morning when you go up the common, Sunday morning in the summer, and it's packed with proud parents and grandparents watching these little kids chasing around on a slightly smaller common. It's terrific, and long may it continue, and let's hope that these youngsters continue to move on and upwards in the club. We've also got a midweek team now, which I'm threatening to make a comeback for. Not as a bowler, I hasten to add, my shoulder has at last given up the ghost. And the third 11 have secured the Hannakins Farm Ground and Pavilion for their home games, which will be a lot better than moving between Admiral's Park and Cheltenham Park or whatever. We also now run, as well as the two Sunday teams, we've occasionally turn out a fourth 11 on a Saturday, so that's some achievement for a small, what is basically a small village side. Stock Cricket Club, naturally, is all about the people in the village. I mean, for instance, in 1935 there was a game played between Stock and Stock Ladies to celebrate the King's Silver Jubilee. That was revived in 1977 to celebrate our current Queen's Silver Jubilee. And if you look closely, you can see a very athletic Angela Bill standing on the end. So she tells me she thinks the men won, despite being severely handicapped in the rules, but nevertheless, great fun. And we also had some wonderful characters at Stock. My career in village cricket spanned 52 years, so I guess you don't need a few characters. David Lang I've already mentioned, but Fred Makins, Andrew's grandfather, was a great character. And I actually had my first innings for Stock with Fred. It was at Great Bursted, and at the time they played down near Barleylands in a field. The ground is long gone. And I went in, this was for Stock seconds, went into bat at about number 7 or 8, probably far too high for me. Fred was already in his sort of off-white yellowish flannels, which the old flannels were, they always went that colour, with a cravat, and his whites held up with an old tie, which was standard form of dress. He met me halfway to the wicket. "Right, boy," he said, "what you think is a 3 is a 1. I'll get them in 4s. Well, I ended up 3 not out, and we won. So I can remember Fred hitting a lot of 4s over mid-wicket and square leg. And that was wonderful. I was hooked on cricket after that. Another great character was Charlie Doe. Charlie was wonderful. He used to turn up for the second team. Well, to my age, he was ancient by then. He probably wasn't that old, but he seemed ancient to me. And our skipper Albert used to say to Charlie, "Mr. Doe, next over." And Charlie used to methodically roll his sleeves up, and he'd march back 5 paces perhaps. And he used to walk into bowl. He didn't really run, he walked into bowl, and the ball landed on a perfect length, and every ball would hit the middle stump if the batsman missed it. And being said, he was no great pace, he didn't spin it, he just bowled dead straight. And second team cricket, he took a lot of wickets. Batsman might hit him for a 6, it didn't matter to Charlie, the next ball was exactly the same, dead straight on middle stump. And the batsman would probably try something different and miss and get bowled. And I said to Charlie once, "Charlie, how did you learn to bowl so straight?" "Well, Carl," he said, "when I was a lad, I used to come up and bowl to the toffs in the nets. And they used to put half a crown on the middle stump. And if you hit the middle stump, you got half a crown, and that was a lot of money back then." I've already mentioned Albert Dixon. Albert Dixon was the groundsman. He was also, in my youth, second team's captain. And in those days, as a youngster, you received some privileges. After the game, you'd probably end up with a whole row of brown ales in front of you, although you were well underage in the pub or the club. You didn't have to buy a drink, they were bought for you. But on the field, you received no charity whatsoever. You were there to A, do as you're told, and be do well or forget it. And I'd been doing reasonably well, and we went to play at Margaretting. And as I've said, in the second team, I don't think I'd ever bowled with a new ball in my life, other than the cheap 2 and 6p ones we used to buy for ourselves in Woolworths to play with. And Margaretting, it was Margaretting's first team, and they produced a new ball. And Albert had asked me to open the bowling. So I had this new ball in my hand, didn't know what was going to happen. Well, in fact, a new ball does tend to swing. And I swung the old ball, so the new ball, it was going, and I didn't know what to do. So I bowled about 3 wides, about 5 near wides, and in sheer desperation slowed right up and bowled a rank half volley which got hit for 6. I will leave out the expletives, but I can assure you there were a lot of expletives for Albert. Basically, what do you think you're doing? And I said to Albert, well, I've never bowled with a new ball before, Albert. Right, he said, give it to someone that has. That was my bowling for the afternoon. Can you imagine doing that to a lad now? They'd never play again. Albert's brother Freddie was rather more sympathetic captain, a great cricketer, and he was probably the best all-rounder Stock ever had. He was a left-handed batsman that could hit the ball hard. He could put the ball exactly where he wanted it, and he wasn't afraid to get hit if it meant taking a wicket either. I mean, I've seen Freddie find a patch no bigger than that on the wicket that helped him. And unlike the modern Test cricketer, Freddie could hit that patch 5 times out of 6 and be disappointed he didn't hit it 6 times out of 6. I've seen him do it time and time again. As I say, he wasn't afraid to get hit. On one occasion, playing at Burnham, the fast bowlers, Colin Porter and Barry Tarbin at the time, had whipped through the top order, but were being held up by 2 defending batsmen. Of course, in those days, you could play for a draw. So Colin and Barry kept humping it down, and these batsmen just kept stopping it. So Freddie said, oh, give us the ball, Cole, I'll have a go. And Colin couldn't believe it. He was astonished. Freddie came on and he bowled a slow full toss down the leg side. Batsman gleefully hit it for 6. Next ball, another slow full toss down the leg side, left arm. Once again it disappeared for 6. Colin was perplexed by this time. What on earth are you doing, Fred? Just watch and learn, boy, he said. Next ball, another slow full toss down the leg side, being out of the ground. 4th ball, by this time the batsman was softened up, overconfident, typical Freddie ball, right on the spot, bang, all over. See what I mean, said Fred? And that was Fred. You could learn from Fred, but he'd never tell you, you had to watch and you had to learn. And Colin Porter, what a guy. Undoubtedly, in my view anyway, the best fast bowler that's ever been in British cricket around here in his heyday, and towards the end of his career when he slowed up, he could make the ball talk. Took 100 wickets virtually every season until the league cricket curtailed the number of overs he was able to bowl. And he also became quite a useful batsman towards the end of his career. And finally, not all the characters are players. For a number of years in the in the 80s and probably the early 90s, if you mentioned Stock Cricket Club, people would look at you for a minute and they'd say, oh yeah, that's the team where that old lady puts the numbers up for you, isn't it? And that was dear old Mrs. Brooker, who used to write things in Stock Press in praise of the cricket club, and she used to turn up every Saturday afternoon and put the numbers up. She didn't always get them right, but she loved putting the numbers up. And she'd ask Marion, who was our scorer by that time, and she'd ask Marion, how many overs now? But after every over, oh shit. But wonderful. Right, Phil will tell you, I could have carried on all night. I'm sure I've missed bits out I've written down, but hopefully that's given you a feeling for cricket within the village. Long may it continue. We upset neighbours now, because they had the temerity to build houses near the ground. That's their fault, they knew the ground was there. And of course bats have got bigger, and they hit the ball further, and the wickets got better, and bowlers naturally aren't as good as I was. So the ball does disappear further, but I'm sure we'll carry on playing on Stock Common for many years to come. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, where you going? I'd like to thank all our three speakers here this evening. Colin, Keith and Andrew. Where are the other two? Keith and Andrew. Where we can put them properly, Andrew. I was associated with the bowling club for a while, and I did drive the motorised mower, not always to Archie's satisfaction when he was groundsman, but I did drive that mower for a while. I shall be eternally grateful to the football club. Keith probably doesn't know it, he won't know it, but in 1964 I was desperate to get to see West Ham play Preston in the cup final at Wembley, and the football club kindly gave me their 2 tickets for that season, and I thoroughly enjoyed myself that afternoon. And lastly, it's Colin. I met you down at the golf club on Monday. I said, have you got your talk ready for Thursday night? He said, well, no, it's not on Thursday night. I said, it is. He said, no, I've got a fortnight yet. It's on the 28th. No, Colin, it's on Thursday. Anyway, I came here this evening expecting probably not to see Colin, but thank goodness. Anyway, grateful thanks to all three of you for a very extensive resume of all the clubs, and thank you very much for your time. Yeah.